Okay, I think that almost everyone that registered joined in. So I'll start just by thanking everyone for coming, reminding a couple of things. We are recording this webinar. So if you guys don't want to show up on the image or in audio, don't turn on your mics or your cameras. And also use the chat for posing questions, and we'll go from there. Just to tell you a little bit, what is EPICURE? EPICURE is a European project. It gathers all the facilities in Europe for AOHPC, so it's a large consortium with a lot of partners. So when you apply to computing time through the AOHPC JU access calls, you can actually request support for the EPICURE project, and we can help you to port your code into our machines, whatever machine you choose. We can help you optimize your code and also give you some help in managing your workflows. So that's the whole idea of EPICURE. And in this sense, EPICURE has also a component, a training component. And these webinars is going to be a series of webinars along the way. So at least there will be one every single month, every 2 months, about a topic that it's interested the community. So we'll be inviting really marvelous speakers like the 3 that we have today, and that I'll let Marcos introduce. But to the 3 speakers, thank you so much for joining us and for giving this lecture. But EPICURE will have this webinar every 2 months with a different topic, a different subject, and things that you can also suggest to us. Marcos at the end is going to do a survey, so we ask you to participate on that survey and to reply if there's any topic that you feel that it's going to be interesting for you, and if we gather enough momentum on it, we'll probably do a topic on it. So the project will last 4 years, so we'll be seeing each other regularly, I hope. Having that said, I'm gonna pass the word to Marcos to start this webinar series. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Joe. So today is the first webinar of our webinar series, and as our first speakers we're going to have Silvio Rizzi, Joseph Insley, and Victor Mateevitsi, who come from the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility, and they will talk about their work in scientific visualization at the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility. So our speakers, like I said, and we wish that you use the chat throughout the presentation to interact with us. Let's just speak a bit about the speakers. They are experts in scientific visualization. They work at the Argonne labs, and they all have a serious background in industry or in academia, which really makes them experts in scientific visualization. I will be the moderator for this session, and just some useful information. Try to keep your microphone muted during the session. The session will be recorded, like João said, and it will then be published publicly. And so I think I can give the word to our speakers, and yeah, you can take it away.
So let me start sharing my PowerPoint view and go into presentation mode. Are you seeing the right view, just to confirm?
Yeah, it seems like it.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So I'll mute myself and let Joe start the presentation.
So thanks, everyone. Hi, my name is Joe Insley. I'm the team lead for this analysis here at the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility. So Silvio, Victor, and I will all sort of share presentation responsibility. So I'll kick things off. So if you go ahead to the next slide. So a little bit about us and our facility. So we're from Argonne National Laboratory, which is one of 17 national labs in the Department of Energy in the United States. And so like I said, there's 17 national labs. A few of them actually have several locations. We are one of two that's located in the state of Illinois, both of us in the western suburbs of Chicago. And so in this view here, we distinguish between the blue ones are Department of Energy labs, and then the red ones are specifically from the Office of Science within the Department of Energy. So next slide. So a little about Argonne itself. So we were founded in 1946. Actually, we were the first national lab in the United States. Our roots are traced back to the Manhattan Project. And our founding mission was to develop peaceful uses for nuclear power. And so next slide. So we're a multi-purpose lab. So some of the labs are dedicated to a specific science domain. So for example, Fermilab, our sister lab down the road, is a particle physics an accelerator laboratory. But we do research across all science domains. So we also foster collaborations across not only divisions and sciences, but also with other national and international partners. We're home to several user facilities, which are open to researchers around the world, including the Advanced Photon Source, which provides ultra-bright, high-energy X-ray beams. They're actually in the process right now of upgrading, so when they come out of their upgrade, they'll be on the order of 500 times brighter than they were before, which was already leading edge. And then, of course, the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility, our division, which provides leadership supercomputing facilities and resources for open science. And I'll say a little bit more about that as we go. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we work across science domains. So that's everything from physical and life sciences to climate, global security. I mentioned our user facilities. And we've also invested a lot of energy and resources into training. So looking at workforce development, particularly in STEM fields, in order to prepare our science leaders for the future. So next slide. So a little bit about us. This is our group, the visualization data analytics group, then the leadership computing facility. As I mentioned, I'm the team lead. Victor and Silvio are with me today. And they can say a little bit more about what they do when we get to them. And then also Janet Knowles, who's not here with us, is also a member of our team. And we have a postdoc that's working with us, in particular looking at preparing codes for Aurora, which is our exascale computer, which I'll say more about in a bit. So next slide. So sort of a brief history of ALCF in one slide. So we started in 2004, before we're officially a division within the lab. that came in around 2006. And so the mission of the facility is to provide leadership class computing resources to the open science community. So over the years, we've stood up and maintained a series of leading edge resources, including Aurora, which recently crossed the exascale barrier. And along with the compute resources themselves, we provide software and expertise to research teams to help them achieve their science goals. So next slide. Right, and so of course, visualizing this data that's produced is a big part of that. And so that's where our team comes in and what we'll talk mostly about today. And so over the course, we've leveraged a variety of visualization tools for this. Some are homegrown, some are visualization tools that are open, they're open source to the science community. Department of Energy has made a significant investment in some of those tools. So Visit and PearView are among them. So we largely use PearView, but it's sort of our primary tool. But we also use tools like Visit and VMD and other things like that, as well as I mentioned some homegrown things. And we've also, Silvio will talk more about this in more detail in a bit, but we've also focused on in situ visualization and analysis, right? So as our resources are getting larger, the gap between how fast we can compute data and how fast we can write it, right, continues to grow. And so there's this need for doing visit analysis on the data while it's in memory. And so there's, as you probably know, there's a lot of research in that space in the HPC area in general. And so we're an active part of that. So next slide. So I mentioned we provide computing resources. Polaris is our current production resource. It's a 34 petaflop machine, and it's really intended to be a stepping stone to Aurora, which I'll talk about in a second. But just briefly, it's 560 nodes, each node with 4 NVIDIA A100 GPUs. So it's an NVIDIA-based machine. And again, it's our current production resource. So when people apply for time on the resource, this is the machine they're most likely going to get for now. Next slide. Right, so Aurora is our upcoming system. We're still finalizing components to ensure stability. So it's not quite in production yet, but it is on the floor and running. It officially crossed the exaflop threshold last month. And that was with about 85% of the nodes available. In the end, it'll have on the order of 10,000 nodes, each with 6 Intel-based GPUs. And so it's been number 2 on the top 500 list since November. So the last 2 lists to come out. And this last one that was released in late May or early June put us number 1 in the AI space. So next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit about, give some examples of some of the visualizations that we've done, teams that we've worked with. This is data that comes from one of our Aurora Early Science Program projects, right? So the Early Science Program is, as I mentioned, Aurora is not quite available yet, but we have this program that enables a select number of early users to get early access to the hardware and software stack that's going to run on it in order to be able to prepare their codes so that come day 1, when it's actually in production, they'll be able to run their codes at scale and efficiently using the resource. And so this data comes from Amanda Randalls. She's a researcher at Duke University. And in particular, they're looking at blood flow and the flow of cancer cells in the bloodstream. And so this is a few examples of some recent work that we've done with them. The last two are of particular note because they were rendered on Aurora. So Aurora, as I mentioned, it's Intel GPU based, and it's one of the first supercomputers that is that will have hardware ray tracing cores on the GPUs, and so this will leverage these tools leverage that, and we've been doing some work with Intel to help prepare for that. And so this is a couple of examples of that. So if you go to the next slide, so we did a demonstration of these capabilities with Intel at Supercomputing last year, and so we ran a ParaView server on Aurora, or it's the early hardware that was available, that's called Sunspot. So we ran 16 nodes, 96 GPUs there, and then we had a ParaView client running on the show floor that was connected and able to look at and interactively view this data. And so this data wasn't specifically being looked at in situ, but those capabilities will be there. So next slide. So I just have a couple more examples I'll show of work we've done, and I mentioned we're available for open science, so anyone can apply for time on our resources, and often those teams return, and so we have a number of collaborations that have lasted a number of years. This is an example. Silvio Rizzi, who happens to be an Argonne scientist, was looking at fuels and combustion. Most recently, the image on the right is focused on biofuels in aviation engines, and so looking at moving away from the carbon footprint and more into the biofuel space, but a lot of the same types of science that goes into it. Next slide. Great. So I also have an ongoing collaboration with Adam Burrows from Princeton University, where he's looking at different stages of core collapse and supernova explosion. And so because our resources have been, the scale is obviously growing, and they're able to expand on their models. He's looking at not just doing a single star or type of star, but building catalogs of many different models of different scale. So for example, some of they've been building, excuse me, stars from, I think the smallest I've seen them do is 6 solar masses up to like 60. And so again, sort of building this catalog. And then with that, we've been building pipelines and workflows for being able to look at a number of different types of characteristics of these stars and building workflows that enable us to run that same workflow over many different models in order to be able to then have this, again, sort of a visual catalog along with their catalog of data to help them explore these stars. And then next slide, please. So this is the last one that I'll cover. Again, another long running collaboration. This one with the HAC cosmology team that goes back more than 10 years now. And in that time, we've used various tools, including some homegrown ones. These are a few examples of some of the things we've done more recently. Well, I guess as recently as the last 5 years or so. Including them, and so we've moved away a little bit from some of the homegrown tools and pretty much using ParaView exclusively these days, including this most recent image Again, this was rendered on Aurora, but also significantly, it was one of the first large-scale science runs to be computed at scale on Aurora using about 1,500 nodes. And so with that, I think I'll conclude and hand things over to Silvio that will talk more about some of the in situ stuff that I alluded to before.
Thank you, Joe. Hi, everyone. I'm Silvio Rizzi. I'm a computer scientist at the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility. And I'm going to describe a little bit the problem of in situ viz and analysis. And I'll start by saying that we used to have a really old slide to show here from the time when Titan, one of the first supercomputers with GPUs, was around. And at that time, our community identified a problem, and that problem was 5 orders of magnitude difference between flops and I/O. So this is an updated slide with numbers that Victor collected recently, and we still have the problem, right? On Frontier and Aurora, you see 5 orders of magnitude between flops and storage. So that's what we've been trying to address in the last maybe 10 or more years. So having issues here. The problem is that the I/O is expensive and it's limited as well. So you can't, the science teams, they cannot afford to save all the data that they're computing. And if that happens, there's an opportunity for missing science, missing discoveries. If you have to save your data every 1,000 time steps, because that's the only thing you can do, something may happen in those in between those 1,000 time steps, and you may miss it. So that's why we're proposing this solution called in situ viz and analysis. And let me talk about the traditional way of doing this. So our science teams will run their campaigns, their simulation campaigns. They have a year, a calendar year to actually work on that. And they will save their data, and in situ viz and analysis will the viz and analysis, not in situ, will traditionally come after that, and maybe months after the simulation campaign is finished, or maybe even years, right? So that's what we call post hoc viz and analysis. So the data is available on disk, and we explore it at a later time. Now, with in situ, the paradigm shifts a little bit because we're trying to perform the viz and analysis while the data is in memory. So we have access to the full data set and the full temporal series. So this means that you need to add some code to the simulation code. You need to couple it with something. And if that's the case, you want to use zero copy to share the data, meaning that there's no data duplication or even data movement, right? So you want to minimize that. To minimize also your memory footprint. And so in the work that we're doing recently, everything works on, all simulations run on the GPU these days. And so we wanted to stay on the GPU, right? We want to minimize even movement to the host. So we're doing some preliminary work on sharing GPU pointers between the simulation and analysis code. And so here's an example following what those slides that Joe showed earlier of our historical work on in situ viz and analysis at the facility at Argonne. And so one of the first works, pioneering works, was from Ken Jansen and team running the FASTA code. Ken is at the University of Colorado, Boulder, I think. And the code that they used at that time became Catalyst, the component of the in situ component of Paraview these days. On the top right, you see an image of early work we did in terms of instrumenting the NEC 5000 code for in situ Bayesian analysis. And this came as a poster with a student that we worked with on a summer a few years ago. And that kept evolving, and we'll have more to talk about that. There's a couple images here also of blood flow simulations. The one on the middle left is from Professor Ji-Fu Tan from Northern Illinois University. He's coupling actually two codes, Palabos for fluid simulation and LAMPS for blood cell simulation. And we instrumented that with Sensei. We were part of the Sensei team since 2016. The project ended last year, but we're still involved. And the interesting part of this is that we enabled bidirectional control of the simulation. That means that from the analysis side and from the pair view interface, you can send data back to the simulation and alter some of those parameters. Joe already mentioned the work with the Duke team and Professor Amanda Randles. This images come from that. And with them, we work instrumenting their code initially with Sensei. And these days, we're also experimenting with Ascent and Catalyst. And finally, at the bottom left, there's an image of recent work, and Victor will cover more. We'll talk more about this in another slide. So let me share an interesting success story here, visualizing NEC-RS data in situ with Sensei. And the first thing I want to share is this citation with our own Victor as the first author here. But if you see the names of the authors, you may recognize folks from Jülich Supercomputing Center. So this actually started a very prolific collaboration with them. And the other interesting thing that I want to mention or highlight is that this paper actually won best paper last year in the ISAP workshop, which is the in situ Bayesian analysis workshop collocated with supercomputing. So this is from our side mostly work of our own Victor. Speaking a little bit of NEC-RS, that's the next or the evolution of the NEC 5000 code, right? Using the spectral element method or higher element methods. But now it's accelerated on the GPU, and they have a component that is called OCA for running on multiple GPUs. And now it can run on the CPU and GPU, and it was part of the exascale computing project of the US Department of Energy. And so it's a code that runs on the current exascale supercomputers, Frontier and Aurora. And so we wanted to experiment with this code and essentially create two different workflows, one for in situ Bayesian analysis that we evaluated at the Argonne site, and another for in-transit Bayesian analysis that was evaluated at the Jülich Supercomputing Center. And in-transit here means that there's some data movement. The data goes from one set of nodes that are computing to a different partition or set of nodes that are creating the visualization and analysis. So we used the Sensei in situ framework for this. And here we have a slide that some of you may be familiar with because we've been showing it for years now. And it describes the architecture of a simulation instrumented with Sensei for in situ Bayesian analysis. So on the left, there's a light blue block showing the simulation. And there's in the center, there's what we call the bridge, and Sensei providing two different things. A data adapter that actually represents the data in a given in a specific data model based on BTK for those who are familiar with the visualization toolkit. So it borrows its data model. And then a configurable analysis adapter on the right, which means that through an XML, a simple XML file, you can select what kind of analysis and what kind of backend of the multiple existing backends created by our community you will use for your specific needs. So you can specify that at runtime just with a simple XML text file. And so the experiments for this specific paper were about quantifying the computational overhead in situ and in transit specifically. And as I mentioned already, the in situ case was run on Polaris, our GPU-based machine at Argonne, and the in transit case was run on Joul's booster at the Jülich Supercomputing Center. All this code is available, and there are artifacts, and I'll refer you to the paper if you would like to see additional details. So this is on the Argonne side, right? It's a nuclear reactor simulation. This example case comes with the NECRS code. It's included in the code, and here the image was captured in situ and rendered with a ParaView catalyst. So that's essentially the results that we're showcasing here. And interestingly enough, Victor was able to run this on up to half of the machine, which is considered large scale. In our cases, for capability systems, if you use more than 20% of the machine, it's considered large scale or capability jobs in our facility. So this uses the half of the machine, and if you notice the proportion between nodes and ranks, we're running 4 ranks per node because we have 4 GPUs per node. So essentially, that's the balance between MPI ranks and nodes. So this is a slide from our colleagues at Jülich and showing their specific machine. And it's very similar to our Polaris with the same GPUs, 4 per nodes. They have 2 CPUs per node. But other than that, the systems are somehow comparable. And they experimented with this in transit approach, moving data from the simulation that's a Rayleigh-Benard convection problem. And so moving the data to analysis node in a ratio of 4:1 that is shown in this slide, meaning that for every 4 nodes doing computation, there's 1 node doing this and analysis. And so I'm showing mostly the graphics aspects of this, but the paper also has some comparisons and benchmarking. So if you're interested in those, I'll refer you to the paper. So the next thing I would like to highlight, and as Joe mentioned earlier, our facility is open to the entire world community of scientists. And so here, I want to highlight work from 2 young researchers from the National Center for High Technology in Costa Rica. And they're working on actually enabling in situ vision analysis, and they're running their codes on our Polaris machine as well. So the first one is Johan Villalobos, and he's interested in flood simulations. And he's using the Sergey code from a collaborator, and again in Jülich Supercomputing Center, and instrumenting it with Ascent and Catalyst, and experimenting with that. This again on our Polaris supercomputer. Johan is also interested in performance portability, and he's working, and I think he probably sent it already, on a paper comparing this different frameworks for performance supportability, including Caucus, OpenMP with offload or target, ALCA, which is the one in NECRS that I mentioned earlier, and Raja from Livermore. Johan did some preliminary work on this that was published last year at the Carla Supercomputing conference in Latin America that we're involved in trying to support. And so their work actually won best paper there. So this is a continuation of that specific work. And another super interesting work here from Christian Ash, also at Senat, Costa Rica, and Christian is interested in seismic simulations and also enabling in situ vis and analysis for them. So this is an image of their preliminary work as well. Christian is will be actually a participant, and I want to advertise here. He is a participant he was selected to participate in APESC, which is our program for extreme scale computing. It's a highly intensive training program for especially early career and young researchers that Argonne provides every August. So if people in the audience are interested in learning more about that, please let us know and we'll provide links. This is free. It's highly competitive. You need to apply, but everyone is encouraged to apply and attend to this. With this, I'm gonna give it to Victor to actually show additional examples and more of the most recent work and the leading edge work in situ vis and analysis at the facility.
Yeah, thank you, Silvio. So what I'm going to talk about, so Silvio kind of talking about in situ and the work that we have done, and he covered how things used to be post hoc, and now we're looking at visualizing and analyzing while things are in memory. So kind of like our motivation and thinking was, if we have the data in memory passed to our visualization framework, what else can we do? Can we actually use that and connect to the simulation and computationally steer the simulation? So that might mean things like changing some vector fields or some scalar array, or just even going in and looking at the data in real time. That's working. This work that I'm going to talk about, it's under review. Hopefully it's going to get published very soon. Next slide, please. And this work primarily has been done by Andres Sewell, who is one of our students, and he is from Utah State. Some bit of background. For this work, we use Ascend, and Silvio talked a little bit about Ascend. But it's basically an easy-to-use flyweight in situ visualization analysis library. It doesn't really have any dependencies, so it's really easy to include in your code. If you do want to have rendering capabilities, then you have to include VidKM, and that's basically the only dependency. VidKM, I believe it doesn't have any dependencies either, so it's very easy to include in your code. It uses conduits for describing data, and it does support zero-copy GPU to GPU. What I mean by that is that as you have your data on the GPU, you just pass pointers to Ascend. In contrast to Sensei or Catalyst, where you have to copy data on the CPU and then pass it to your visualization and analysis toolkit. And use VidKM, and it also has a Python and Jupyter interface. Next slide, please. So if we compare Ascend with Sensei, Catalyst, and VisitLibSim, we will see that the three of them, they have limited steering functionality. There is some steering functionality, but it's limited. One big drawback is these tools, they do not allow you to send back modified data. So let's say you have a mesh and you want to modify that mesh, and then you send it back in the simulation, you cannot do that. And also a lot of times, as you modify, let's say, your mesh, that will require changes to the code of the GUI version that you communicate with the simulation with. So that makes the development more difficult. Next slide, please. So we had the idea. So we interviewed 7 scientists to make sure that we're building something that's going to be useful. And they were across lots of domains. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, thank you. And yeah, we got back feedback and insights. And we kind of identified these broad categories of things that scientists want to do. One of them is steering. So like I said, change some parameters of the simulation, maybe adjust the resolution or modify the geometry or modify the simulation data. Another one is exploration and discovery. So checking on the simulation, seeing where it's at, maybe interactively exploring the data. You know, when you do in situ, you have to decide a priori what filters you're going to use, for instance, streamlines, and where you will position the camera. But now with bidirectional in situ, you can go in and maybe the region of, and you can explore your data, and maybe the region of interest has changed. So now you can either move the camera to the new location, or maybe you can add a second camera. And then also trial and error. So when you start a simulation and you start with your initial conditions, you might not know exactly the numbers you need to put in. So within situ, you can start a simulation and you can start experimenting, trial and error until you find the right values. And then finally, they also ask for external notification. So let's say you're running the simulation, things are going to break or things broke, or maybe there is a phenomena that's interesting. How would the scientists know about this? Well, with external notification, you get an email, you get an SMS on your phone, and then you can connect and check the simulation. Next slide, please. So our contribution was basically building these general purpose steering interface that will allow you to do everything that I just described. And it's built upon Ascend, it's scalable. And if your code is instrumented, you don't have to re-instrument the code. If it's already instrumented with Ascend, you just check out the latest version of Ascend, and now you have bidirectional steering. So how does it work? Well, you have to define the steering behavior. Obviously, Ascend doesn't know what you want to do, so you need some callbacks that, let's say, change the velocity, and then you can call those callbacks within Ascend. And to make things easier, we're also using the Jupyter notebook that Ascend already had. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is, oh yeah, I forgot to say this. So we also have a bonus contribution. So, you know, they talked about external notifications. How do you do that? I'm not gonna write a mail client for Ascend, but we do have shell commands that can send email. So the idea was, how can we use that? So we added the ability from Ascend to run shell commands, which means you can you know, run the mail client and send an email, or you know, connect with Twilio and send notifications to your phone. So anything you want, as long you can run on shell. Next slide, please. Now you might ask yourselves, wait a minute, this runs on a supercomputer, so it's going to run on 10,000 nodes. I don't want to get 10,000 emails. So we thought about that too. So there is an MPI behavior flag, and you can say run it only on a root, so just send me one email, or run it on all nodes. Next slide, please. And this is how it kind of looks like. You have the user. The user talks with the steering interface, which then talks with Ascend, and Ascend talks with the simulation. And it's, you know, bidirectional. It goes from the user to the simulation, and then from the simulation back to the user. Next slide, please. And here is a comparison table where you kind of see that the Ascend with bidirectional, you can modify simulation variables, you can have internal commands, which are callbacks, external commands, and you can modify data. Next slide, please. And let's look at an example. So in this case, we have a lattice Boltzmann simulation. Next slide. And then the problem is that the resolution is too low. Next slide. And you will see what I mean by that. So the resolution is too low, and that will lead to instability. And what happens is that once that instability happens, the user connects to the Jupyter notebook, can modify the parameters, fix the simulation, and then keeps running. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just, I talked about that. Yeah, okay. And here's how it looks like. You might want to, oh, do I need to write code for this? Like, how does it actually work? So there are these YAML files, and I have a callback that detects instability. That callback that sets stability is C++ code within a send that the user needs to write. Next slide. And then there is a second callback that's called is unstable. So checks if there is an instability or not. And if it is unstable, then there is that actions file, unstable action.yaml, that's going to run, and that file is below where it basically sets the email. Next slide. So once the email comes, the simulation pauses and kind of waits. You can predefine for how long it's going to wait until you connect. Next slide. And you can do the same thing in Jupyter. So you can connect. Oh yeah, so no, excuse me. This is, so once you connect, this is what you see. This is the Jupyter notebook. So you connect, you execute a callback, which restores back the simulation to a stable condition. And then you increase the resolution. And then you set the new resolution, and then you basically say now run, and you disconnect. Next slide. So the use case that I just described was kind of like a small use case that we tested on just a couple of nodes. And right now we just run a huge case on full HPC, a big run. In this case, it's really interesting. This is a wind simulation, and they want to see how trees affect the wind in a city. So this is actually real data collected from LiDAR. And they use the in situ bidirectional capability so that they can decrease the LiDAR points, because you don't actually need the full resolution. It's just not necessary. So they would run it, and then they would remove points, and run it again and remove points, and they would do that in situ until they got to a number that's stable. Next slide, please. And what they did is, every time they loaded a case, that would take about 20 minutes. And then they would modify the LiDAR resolution, and then they would have to rerun. And in this case, next slide. In this case, with in situ, they could do that on the fly, which means that they don't have to, let's say they have 20, they have to run it 20 times half an hour, that's 600 compute nodes. In this case, you run it once, you load it once, that's 30 minutes. But then in situ, you modify things, and you don't have to reload the data for half an hour, basically. So, it's 600 minutes versus 40 minutes. That's how much time they saved. Next slide, please. Okay, and now peeking to the future. This is another paper. Next slide. That we have submitted. So in this case, we leverage the GPU to GPU. And we used and we also use Catalyst for rendering. So below, the images below, those are VKM, GPU to GPU. The data never touch the CPU. And then the video above, that's through Catalyst. And we're also working on workflows with Julie to connect the two sides. So maybe the simulation runs on one side, and the rendering happens on another side. Next slide. Oh yeah, so thank you. You have any questions?
So thank you to our speakers. We have some questions that were posted in the chat. I think John actually answered one of them. So I can probably read the questions posed in the chat. And
You want me to paraphrase them?
yeah, sure.
Okay, so one of the questions Joe kindly asked on the chat, replied on the chat. Thank you so much, Joe, for doing that. So the other question that was posed is, was that in the beginning of the presentation, we talked about the zero copy feature of in situ that we want to target. And the question is, well, if we are using VTK as a memory format, then how is the zero copy goal achieved in this type of in situ visualization approach?
Right. So it depends, right? So in the case where you are doing some conversion from the raw data arrays essentially to VTK, or creating ISO surfaces or running some algorithm on it, then yes, in those cases you are going to incur, right? You are going to generate new data essentially. But if, for example, you can directly render some of that data. So for example, some of the tools we've been looking at, like Osprey is Intel's renderer. There's an interface for directly rendering the raw data streams without converting it. In that case, you can just pass the pointer, or also in the case of when you're generating new data, the raw data gets passed by pointer. If you need to subsequently convert that to some other format, then yes, the new data that you compute will require more memory. Does that answer?
I think that was the question. And I think that the other important point is that it's not the algorithms that we do afterwards with the visualization, because those will always need conversion, but it's actually having access to the entire data set that is generated by the simulation, so that we can do things like resampling and so forth, right?
Right. That's the primary thing is that's the primary advantage of in situ, is that you have all of it. But one of the specific advantage that we were talking about with the zero copy is that in cases where, so for example, if I have an algorithm that's implemented in VTK-M, which runs on the GPU or the accelerator, whatever it is, I can pass that input data directly by pointer. I don't have to pass it. I don't have to transfer it back to the host and then back again, right? So you're eliminating at least some data movement, if not data copying. Now you're not going to eliminate all of it, but much of it potentially.
Yeah. So the other question that was posed and partially answered during the simulation is during the presentation by Victor is, so how do you handle multiple cameras? How do you handle doing cut slices and so forth? How can that be achieved? Victor showed how you're doing that with Accent, what makes a lot of sense. I was wondering if there were other solutions, and I think that's what Andre was asking.
Yeah, for Ascend, there is a YAML file, and you can define as many cameras as you want. You can also define, as many slices or cut planes as you want. So right now, with the drawback with Ascend is you have to edit the YAML file. We are working on a GUI for that, but that's not ready yet. That's work in progress. For ParaView, for instance, ParaView, I think Joe can answer about ParaView and Catalyst.
Right. So it is possible, if you're using Catalyst/ParaView, to connect to a live ParaView server, right? So you would send from the simulation via Catalyst or via Ascent through Catalyst, essentially to a ParaView server, and then you connect your client the way you normally would, and so you have access to all the GUI tools that you normally would with ParaView, and it would just get the data live from the simulation into the ParaView server. The other thing I would say about that is, so it's similar to using, if you're familiar with using Catalyst, right? So the pipeline we often use is we have some preliminary data, either a smaller scale or something that's representative that we will look at post hoc, or I guess pre hoc in that case, right? So we have some data that we explore, we set up our pipelines, save a Catalyst script that could then just be run on that data, and it can have as many cameras and cutting planes and ISO surfaces as you want.
And I would also like to mention a project called Cinema, connected with multiple camera views. If that's a specific interest, there's this project from our colleagues at Los Alamos called Cinema Science, and it's supported already in Peer View. It's supported in Ascent, and maybe supported in Visit. That part I'm not sure. But it's a way of actually generating a catalog of images from different camera views and also varying some of the parameters. So you can explore those databases interactively at a later time. That's the main idea.
That makes a lot of sense. So the next question that was posed, sorry, Joe, you were saying?
No, I was just also going to add that in addition to doing rendering, you could also do either analysis or generate some data extracts, right? So if you know that there's a particular ISO value that's of interest, then you can generate and save those ISO surfaces, or for, either for the whole data set, or if there's a region of interest or whatever. So it's essentially about reducing the amount of data that you have to save to disk. You're not saving the entire data set, but you're saving something that's important on a much higher frequency.
You got ahead of me, because that was one of my questions. You got ahead of me. Yeah, that's the whole point of in situ, is not to store the entire day. So the other question that is posed is, Victor mentioned that you could interact with the simulation and change steps on the simulation, and this goes into reproducibility, which means, are we storing that information somewhere so that at a later date we can reproduce exactly the same results?
You mean the changes that you made, or the results of after the change?
The changes that you made. So if there's a kind of a provenance being stored.
That's a good question. We haven't thought about that, to be honest. But because, so you can obviously, so when you do the changes, you can decide if you want the output to be rendering, or you can save it as HTF5s, or you can do both. So obviously you do get the results. If you want to save the changes, you are doing the changes in Jupyter. So you could implement that by yourself in Python. That should not be too difficult. But it's not native in Ascent at this point.
I think in fact you can use the notebook, right? You can use the notebook to track your changes. That's an easy way.
Correct. You can say that note. Yes, correct. Yeah, and actually that's a good point, because that's why Jupyter notebooks are for reproducibility.
That's it. I think these are the entire questions from the users. I don't know if anyone has more questions. If you do, please ask them now on the chat. Otherwise, I'm gonna pose one single question. And that single question is, do you think that in situ is one of the enablers for exascale computing and for exascale science? Your personal opinion.
So let me go first. Let me attempt an answer first. And just a personal observation, right? So we've been working on this for quite a few years now, and we are seeing good results only in the last couple of years. So there's still a lot of work to do, but we are seeing we're harvesting the first good results at this time, right? So with successful simulations, exascale users interested now in evaluating these new workflows in their own science. And so with that, I'll pass it to Joe, who I interrupted.
No worries. I was just going to say that, I mean, there's obviously still challenges to it, right? There's things like, you know, the whole a priori knowing where you want to look and those types of challenges. And there's work to address those. But I think in the past, it's been, you know, a nice to have, but as we move forward and by all accounts, that gap between, you know, compute and IO it's not gonna go away, and it's only gonna get larger. And so I think it's gonna move from a nice to have to a need to have type of thing, right? Where if we really want to get value out of the data that we're computing, we need to look at it before we throw it away. And so I think it's becoming increasingly more important to make it part of the overall workflow.
Yeah, and I agree with Joe and Silvio. I just want to add that I think with the interviews, one thing that we have identified is education, meaning that a lot of users, they kind of know what in situ is, but they don't really know the full capabilities of in situ and what they can do with it. And obviously, once we talk about steering, they can grasp it, and then we had to explain, and then we had to demo, and then the brains and they just started flowing, saying, "Oh, this is cool. Now I can do this and I can do that." So yeah, so it's, you know, how do you convey what in situ can do? It's not about convincing; it's about conveying. How do you teach them so that they know that this exists, and then they can use it, and then they get excited.
Okay, so this is a really nice segue. And the answer to your question is with 3 awesome speakers that I need to thank, to the 3 of you. I think that we were able to do a little bit of this conveying what in situ is able to do. Thank you so much for taking your time and for doing it in such a short notice. So thank you so much from our side. To everyone else, we'll be posting this talk on YouTube later after editing. So if you guys want to watch it again, just go to the EPICURE site and it will be there available for everyone. And once again, thank you so much to the speakers.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.